Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to class. This is your ENG503 Prose 2, and today we are going to wind up this section on Jonathan Swift. We're going to be doing the last chapter of the first voyage, that is the voyage to Lilliput. And the previous lectures that we've had, I have explained various aspects of Gulliver's life and Gulliver's travels. Now, this is not going to be the end of Gulliver's travels. I'm just introducing you to the travelogue, and I would expect you to read the other voyages on your own. They're very interesting voyages. When we were doing the introduction, I told you that Gulliver went to the land of the Houyhnhnms and the Yahoos, and he also went to the land of the Brobdingnagians. So Lilliput is just the first voyage that we hear about and that we read about. I would expect you, as students of English, as master's level students, to do a lot of reading on your own. This is just one aspect where I expect you to work on your own and to read the rest of the voyages. Now, if you remember, the last lecture that we had was concerned with chapter 7. And in that chapter, Gulliver told you a little about how his relationship with the emperor of Lilliput had changed. Where before the emperor had been very accommodating and very welcoming, once Gulliver refused to subjugate the people of the island of Blefuscu, the emperor of Lilliput turns against him, and he is aided in this process by two people at his court. The Lord of the Treasury, that is Flimnap, and Bolgolam, the Admiral of the Fleet. So having these two people against him, Gulliver finds it very hard to continue to live in Lilliput the way they want him to live. And of course, the situation is aggravated when the people from Blefuscu come and they invite him to visit them at Blefuscu. Now, these are two kingdoms that face each other across the channel. And in the very early lectures, I pointed out the fact that Jonathan Swift wrote Gulliver's Travels as a satire on contemporary society, and particularly what was going on at court. He takes up governmental policies and he criticizes them, also showing how they can be improved. So if we take the channel between Lilliput and Blefuscu to be the English channel, then we would say that Lilliput and Blefuscu are like England and France, because it's only the English channel that divides them. And just as the English and the French have fought wars between them, they have been ruled by the same kings for some time, and they have a hankering for each other's land, resources, people. So just as the English even today are impressed by what is happening in France, and the French compete with the English, similarly in Lilliput and Blefuscu, you find that the people who live in Lilliput want to go to Blefuscu, and the vice versa is also true. The Blefuscardians also want to come to Lilliput. So when it's a matter of education, Lilliputians go to Blefuscu, Blefuscardians go to Lilliput. So they cannot live together and they cannot survive separately. It's a kind of love-hate relationship between Lilliput and Blefuscu, and that's what Swift is satirizing here. So whether he takes up the figure of the emperor and the empress, or he takes up the different courtiers, he is full of criticism on what is happening, what is being done, and he not only criticizes it, but the thing is that his criticism is very positive because he also offers solutions. He offers resolutions to issues that face the Lilliputians. So at the end of chapter 7, we find ourselves at a point where Gulliver is planning to leave Lilliput and go to Blefuscu because the emperor of Lilliput wants to have him killed, and he is just debating how that is to be done. So when Gulliver finds out that there is a plan to kill him and at least to render him sightless, he decides to make this voyage or this journey to Blefuscu and see what the Blefuscardian king has to offer him. So we're going to start chapter 8 now, and we're going to find out what is going to be discussed here. So in the introduction to chapter 8, Swift says, the author by a lucky accident finds means to leave Blefuscu and after some difficulties returns safe to his native country. So when Gulliver goes to Blefuscu, he finds out that the Blefuscardian king and courtiers are no different from the Lilliputian emperor and courtiers. They're as mean, as cruel, and as cunning as the Lilliputians. So size does not matter when it is a case of cunning, deceit, treachery, dishonesty. The Lilliputians and the Blefuscardians are very small in size. There is no individual who is above 6 inches in height. No individual. With the result that the impression that Gulliver had formed of the Blefuscardians being better than the Lilliputians, that impression is destroyed when he actually visits Blefuscu. So he says, 3 days after my arrival, walking out of curiosity to the northeast coast of the island, I observed about half a league off the sea, somewhat that looked like a boat overturned. So 3 days he's in Blefuscu and he finds out that the people there are as mean, as cruel and cunning as the people in Lilliput. So while he's taking a walk, he sees something in the ocean that looks like an overturned boat. And by that time, he had decided that he had to leave the island. He couldn't go back to Lilliput because the Lilliputian emperor has already decided to kill him or at least to blind him. So how to get out of Blefuscu and where to go? That is the question that is uppermost in Lemuel Gulliver's mind, and while he's taking a walk, he sees what he thinks to be an overturned boat. So what does he do? He says, I pulled off my shoes and stockings, and wailing 200 or 300 yards, I found the object to approach nearer by force of the tide. So when he starts to wade or swim, half swim towards the object, the tide brings the object closer to him. And when the object is brought closer to him, he realizes that his first impression was right, and that it is a boat that perhaps at some time was separated from the ship by a storm. And here he is thinking back of how his ship was broken by the storm, and how he and other crew members escaped in a boat. And when the boat overturned, Gulliver was the only survivor, and he landed on the shores of Lilliput. So he thinks about this when he sees this boat, and when this boat is brought closer to him. So he returned immediately towards the city and desired His Imperial Majesty to lend me 20 of the tallest vessels he had left after the loss of his fleet, and 3,000 seamen under the command of his vice admiral. So he doesn't ask for the entire navy. Remember, he had taken 50 ships of the Blefuscudians, and he had pulled them to the shores of Lilliput. Now the remainder of the vessels are still anchored at Blefuscu, and it is out of this remainder that he requests the king to provide him with 20 ships and 3,000 men, because he needs to bring this boat to the shores of Blefuscu so that he can see if it is in working order. If not, to equip it in such a way that it will be in working order, and that he can therefore use that boat. So the fleet, because it was anchored on the other side of the island, it sailed round and came to where this overturned boat was. So by the time this fleet of 20 ships was arranged for, and they were brought to the northeast side of the island, Gulliver found that the tide had been doing its work, and it had pushed the boat even closer to the shore. The seamen, he says, were all provided with cordage, which I had beforehand twisted to a sufficient strength. Now, because the Lilliputians are very small, everything that they have is small relatively, so that the strongest cables that they have appear to Gulliver to be like threads. So he says that I twisted these threads around each other, and with the help of that, I made a kind of rope or cable with which to drag this boat to the shore. When the ships came up, I stripped myself and waded till I came within 100 yards of the boat. So until that point he could wade. After that, the channel becomes deeper, and so he has to swim out to this boat. The seaman threw me the end of the cord, which I fastened to a hole in the forepart of the boat. So remember the exercise that he carried out when he brought the Blefuscudian fleet to Lilliput? He had tied cables to the prow of the boat, and then once he had all 50 vessels tied with the cable, he put a knot in the cable so that he could hold it in one hand, and that was how he dragged the 50 ships to Lilliput. So he does the same kind of activity now, except that in the previous case it was 50 Blefuscudian ships, which meant that they were very small for Gulliver and did not require all that strength. here he's talking about a boat and a full-sized boat, so he cannot drag the boat on his own. He gets help from Mother Nature, in the sense that the tide brings the boat close to shore, and then he gets these seamen to pull the boat close to the shore. Okay, now it's not easy to bring the boat. It's not a small boat. It's not a Blefuscardian or a Lilliputian boat. You have to remember that this is a human boat. This is the kind of boat that people in England would, for example, have. So the same size. It requires a lot more strength. And these 3,000 seamen are not enough. So what Gulliver does is he pushes the boat from behind, shoves the boat, and the seamen pull the boat from the other side. And so what they have is the boat moving forward because of the tide, because Gulliver is pushing it, and because the Blefuscardians are pulling it. So he comes close to the shore until he can feel the water up to his chin, but he can still walk. His feet are firmly at the bottom of the ocean. And then he rests for 2 or 3 minutes. When he's in that position, he is pushing the boat. He stops swimming and he starts to wade. And then he stops and then give the boat another shove, and so on. So it requires a lot of effort on the part of Gulliver to push and pull the boat until it comes to shore. It's not an easy job because this is a full-sized boat. It's not a tiny Lilliputian boat. It's not a Blefuscardian boat. This is a full-sized boat. So once he gets to that point, he picks up the other cables which have been stored in one of the ships. He fastens it to the boat and then to 9 of the vessels which attended me. So remember, he had asked for 20. He attaches them to 9. And because the wind is favorable, the wind is blowing in the direction that he wants, the boat is pushed and pulled right up to the shore, not just close to the shore, but right up to the shore. And then what he does is he turns it on its bottom to see if the boat is leaking, and he finds out that it was but a little damaged. I shall not trouble the reader with the difficulties I was under by the help of certain paddles which cost me 10 days making to get my boat to the royal port of Blefuscu, where a mighty concourse of people appeared upon my arrival, full of wonder at the sight of so prodigious a vessel. So up to that point, they have been surprised by Gulliver's size. When they see this boat, the size of the boat reinforces the shock that they felt when they saw Gulliver for the first time. And so there are all these people from Blefuscu who come out to see it. You know, it's like a wonder. It's something strange that is happening. They've not seen such a big man before. They've not seen such a big vessel before. So everybody comes out to witness the progression and the ultimate arrival of the boat on the shores of Blefuscu. And then he tells the emperor that this is the boat that can take me back to my country. So please, please, please let me go back. And The emperor at the beginning says, oh, what do you want to do? Why do you want to go back? And then he says, all right, go. Because by this time, the emperor of Blefuscu has also realized that he cannot afford to make the emperor of Lilliput into some kind of a dictator. So he, the emperor of Blefuscu, is reminded of the fact that he cannot afford to have the emperor of Lilliput as an enemy. So what he does is he says, okay, if you want to go, go. Now, he gets permission from the emperor to go, but in his mind, he's going over ideas and memories of Lilliput. And because the last memories were not pleasant for him, he is reminded of them at a time when the emperor of Blefuscu says, it's all right with me if you want to go back home. I'll provide you with whatever you need for your journey. Now Gulliver thinks, why is it that he has not heard from the emperor of Lilliput? Remember, the emperor of Lilliput is going to proceed against him, wants to have him killed or at least blinded, so that he realizes that he has been punished for being a traitor. When he is in Blefuscu and when he is starting to make preparations for his departure, he is reminded of that visit from the nobleman in the middle of the night who came to warn him that this is what the emperor of Lilliput is planning against you. So he says, why is it that I have not heard from him? I've been here for 3 days. Lilliput is not very far away from Blefuscu. Why has the emperor not sent a message to the emperor of Blefuscu? And then he sort of has the idea that the emperor of Lilliput believed that he had gone to Blefuscu only for a vacation and only because he had been given official permission. Remember, he had asked the emperor of Lilliput if he could go to Blefuscu. So the emperor grants him permission, he comes to Blefuscu, but his reason in doing that is not what he told the emperor of Lilliput. Now it is because he finds that living in Lilliput is endangering his life, and that is why he moves. But the emperor of Lilliput is not aware of that. He thinks it's because, you know, he just wants a change of scene. So, and plus Gulliver had promised that he would return in a few days. So the emperor of Lilliput was not really worried when he found out that Gulliver had gone. He said, okay, so he'll come back after a few days. But at last, he was in pain at my long absence, and after consulting with the treasurer and the rest of that cabal, a person of quality was dispatched with a copy of the articles against me. So a few days passed, and then what Gulliver had been expecting happened. The emperor of Lilliput sent a message to the king of Blefuscu outlining Gulliver's crimes and also stating what his punishment is going to be. So the envoy who came with this message, he was given certain instructions, and a couple of them I'm going to mention here. Swift says that the envoy was to represent to the monarch of Blefuscu the great lenity of his master, that is, the emperor of Lilliput is very kind, and he's content to punish me no farther than with the loss of mine eyes. And you know, he thinks that this is something that is being very lenient. He's being very kind to to Gulliver. It's very upsetting when you think of this in terms of the time that Swift is writing about. He sees what is happening at court, he sees the kind of decisions that are taken, and he does not like them. So he offers this travelogue as a kind of commentary on what was happening in the court of England at that time. So he says that the Emperor of Lilliput sends an ambassador, an envoy, with this message. The Emperor of Lilliput is very kind, very gentle, very lenient, and therefore has issued commands that Gulliver should be blinded because he has escaped from justice, and if I did not return in 2 hours, I should be deprived of my title of Nardek and declared a traitor. So side by side with this instruction, the envoy brings the message that Gulliver is to return to Lilliput at once, and that if he does not return in 2 hours, then that title that the Emperor of Lilliput had given him of Nardek, or of being someone of very good stature, will be taken away from him. Now that doesn't upset Gulliver. You give him a title, Nardek, anything. It doesn't make any difference to Gulliver, because that title will not be important for him when he goes back home, and he ultimately has to go back to England. So this is the Lilliputian idea of revenge for Gulliver's, what they term, treacherous act of not subjugating Blefuscu. So this is the message that the emperor sends. And then he also has a message for the king of Blefuscu, and he says, in order to preserve the peace between Lilliput and Blefuscu, the emperor of Lilliput expects the emperor of Blefuscu to have Gulliver sent back to Lilliput bound hand and feet, because he's a traitor. Can you really imagine the Blefuscardian binding Gulliver up? It's a different story when the Lilliputians do it. Gulliver is tired, Gulliver is sleeping when they tie him up. But when Gulliver is not sleeping, he's awake, he's sitting up, or he's standing, no Lilliputian or Blefuscardian can afford to tie him up, because Gulliver would just give them one slap and the Blefuscardian would fly. That is what the difference in size does to you. So the emperor of Lilliput is not content to have Gulliver going away from his island. He says he must be brought back and have his eyes put out. And then, the emperor of Blefuscu is very smart. He wants to maintain peace with Lilliput, and he also does not want to make an enemy out of Gulliver. So what he does is, he says, this Man Mountain is going. He has found a boat. Let us send him away so that he does not come between Lilliput and Blefuscu, between England and France. He's going away. Let him go back. He has found a vessel, a boat that will take him away from Lilliput, away from Blefuscu. So the emperor of Blefuscu proves to be smarter than the emperor of Lilliput. So he says, both of us are going to be rid of this man mountain very soon. He will not be eating food from your country. He will not be eating food from my country. He will not be taking cloth from your country. He will not be taking cloth from my country. So he says, in a few weeks he's going to be gone, etc., etc. So not to worry about it. So this is what the Emperor of Blefuscu sends as a response through the envoy. But privately, he tells Gulliver, it's all right if you want to stay in Blefuscu. We would love to have you here. We would love to host you. But Gulliver has reached the point where he does not trust royalty. He doesn't trust the nobility. His experiences have been at 2 courts, and he has decided that he's not going to trust either court because they are the same inside. They may have different names, but their nature, their temperament, their character is no different from the others. So he says, I resolved never to put my trust in princes or ministers where I could possibly avoid it. But then you see he has to go out of Blefuscu. He needs stuff to carry with him in the boat. He can't just take the boat and go. He needs food, he needs drink, he needs the emperor's blessings. Otherwise the emperor is going to order his soldiers to fire arrows at his face and hands, and that would cause a lot of harm to Gulliver. So he wants the Emperor of Blefuscu on his side, and he says, since fortune, whether good or evil, had thrown a vessel in my way, I was resolved to venture myself on the ocean rather than be an occasion of difference between 2 such mighty monarchs. And you see the irony. Gulliver is huge. The Lilliputians and the Blefuscudians are tiny, and he calls them mighty monarchs. The emperors of Blefuscu and Lilliput are less than 6 inches in height. How impressive can that be? How mighty can that be? So a lot of irony here, but this is what he tells the Emperor of Blefuscu, because he wants the blessings of the emperor on his voyage. He wants the physical food and drink that is necessary for him on his voyage. He wants to take that. So the emperor says, fine, it suits him to have Gulliver in Blefuscu, but it also suits him to have Gulliver going away from Blefuscu. What would have upset the Emperor of Blefuscu would have been if Gulliver had said, I'm going back to Lilliput. But he doesn't. He says, I'm going back home. So the king is happy, the ministers are happy, Gulliver is happy, everyone is happy. These considerations moved me to hasten my departure somewhat sooner than I intended, to which the court, impatient to have me gone, very readily contributed. So when he finds out that there's been an envoy from England, that sort of speeds up his desire to go away from this island and never, ever to come back. So he says that this thing hastened my desire to be gone forever and to be gone as soon as possible. And I got a lot of help for that, and the help came in the form of resources. He had 500 men who were working to make him a sail for his boat. Actually, a few men could have done it, or now one man with a machine can do that. But you're talking about the 18th and 19th centuries. So 500 workmen were employed to make 2 sails for the boat. Now the question is, how big would that project be? For somebody of Gulliver's size, not big at all. For someone of the size of the Lilliputians or the Blefuscardians, yes, it would be a problem. It would take them time. It would take a lot of material. So he says that I had these sails made, and in order to do that, I had 13 folds of the strongest linen, and this was stitched together to make it strong and not the kind of sail that can be torn by a strong wind, for example. Okay, so he says that he takes a number of pieces of cloth, he ties them together, and that is what he plans to use. So he makes preparations, and while he's making those preparations, getting the sails done, he sees a huge rock, and this rock he uses as his anchor, because remember, he has to have the boat anchored somewhere. And then he gives details of how he used the tallow of 300 cows, and he used a lot of cloth, he used a lot of cable. The cables had to be twisted together in order to make a very strong rope. And then you had the emperor's carpenters helping him to make oars, because he needed to have something to steer with. He needed to have something to row with. In about a month, when all was prepared, I sent to receive His Majesty's commands and to take my leave. So it took him 1 month to get the oars done, to get the sails made, to have the cables twisted together, and of course to get provisions, food and drink also on the boat. So when the day of his departure arrived, the emperor and the royal family came out of the palace. I lay down on my face to kiss his hand, which he very graciously gave me. So did the empress and young princes of the blood. So the ceremony which had been performed in Lilliput is being repeated here at Blefuscu, and what Swift is trying to tell us is that the Blefuscardians are no different from the Lilliputians. They have different names, they live across the channel from each other, but they are essentially speaking the same. There's no difference between them. His Majesty presented me with 50 purses of 200 sprugs apiece, together with his picture at full length. Now imagine how they think of themselves and how Gulliver thinks of them. The Blefuscardians think that they are wonderful, that they are mighty and strong, but when you compare them with Gulliver, they appear to be tiny, and they appear to have no power, no strength or courage whatsoever. So what happens is, once the boat is prepared and he begs leave, His Majesty thinks that he's doing him a big favor by giving him these gold pieces. For them, it is currency. For Gulliver, those sprugs are the size of maybe sequins, very tiny. They are currency for Lilliput and Blefuscu, but that is not so for Gulliver. Gulliver can hardly make anything out of these sprugs because they're so tiny. They say that they are made of gold, but then gold has to be solid. So, and he also gives Gulliver his picture at full length. Now, Swift is being rather sarcastic here when he says that I put it immediately into one of my gloves. So it's so small. Probably this is the size of the picture. And it's not difficult for Gulliver to keep it safe by putting it in his glove. So that is how much the size differs. The ceremonies at my departure were too many to trouble the reader with at this time. So he says, oh, you know, I'm not going to go into the details. I stored the boat with the carcasses of 100 oxen and 300 sheep, with bread and drink proportionable, and as much meat ready dressed as 400 cooks could provide. That's the amount of workforce it takes to provide something for Gulliver for the voyage. I took with me 6 cows and 2 bulls alive, with as many ewes and rams, intending to carry them into my own country and propagate the breed. So he carries these cows and bulls and sheep because he wants to show people where he has been. He knows there are going to be questions asked and people will want to know why he was away from civilization for such a long time. So he takes these cows and sheep and bull, and then he takes a good bundle of hay and a bag of corn. He has to feed the sheep, he has to feed the sheep and the cows and the bulls. So whatever he takes, he sort of looks after their welfare. It's not that he just starves them to death. He carries within him things which he's going to need on the voyage. So he carries the corn and the hay for the animals, and he carries food and drink and meat for himself. And then the important thing here is, I missed that point out, the emperor says that you have to promise that you are not going to take any Blefuscardians to your native country, no matter how much they want to, no matter how much they try to pressurize you. You have to promise me that you will not take any Blefuscardians. So much as Gulliver wants to take these people and sort of show the rest of the world that there are people of such a short stature also, he doesn't take them because he's already promised them. And he says that when I had gone about 4 leagues to the northward, I saw a small island about half a league to the northwest. So he advances forward and casts anchor on the lee side of the island, which seemed to be uninhabited. He took some refreshment and went to rest. When he woke up after about 6 hours, he found that it was very early in the morning. It was a time probably before dawn. He had his breakfast before the sun was up, that is before the dawn broke. And when he saw the wind was in his favor, was in the direction in which he wanted to go, he decided that he would go as fast as possible. And then he also had a pocket compass, so he could steer according to that. My intention was to reach, if possible, one of these islands, which I had reason to believe lay to the northwest of Van Diemen's Land. So he sets out to search for land, and when he sees land, he is very, very thankful. He goes to this deserted island, he rests there, and then he starts off again. And on the second day, he sees a sail on the ocean, on the surface of the ocean, and he heads his boat towards that side because he wants the resources that the ship has at its command. He didn't find any answer, so he was a little disappointed, and then they hung out the flag, and with the flag they fired a gun, and that was standard operating procedure for all vessels sailing on the ocean to identify themselves. So this ship identifies itself by displaying the English flag, and of course Jonathan Swift is very, very excited. Gulliver is excited because he sees that the ship is an English ship. The ship slackened her sails, and I came up with her between 5 and 6 in the evening, September 26th. And he's very excited because he sees the English flag, and he says, well, you know, I won't have that language problem again, and I can speak with people the way I have been taught to speak. This was a merchant lever. It was not a man of war. It wasn't a warship, but a merchant ship. This merchant ship took on Gulliver, but what Gulliver had not planned on was that he would meet somebody he actually knew on that ship. And that's exactly what happened. He meets this Peter Williams, who is full of praise for him, and so when Peter Williams conveys this to the master of the ship or the captain of the ship, it has a very positive impact on him. And one of the people there in that ship, the person whom he already knew, Peter William, he wanted to know where Gulliver had been. And when Gulliver explained to him, he said, oh, I don't believe that. You know, you are mad. You rest a while, and I'll ask you in the morning. So this person who knew him, he did not really believe Gulliver until such point as Gulliver took out the cows, the bull, and the sheep. I said, okay, what explanation do you have for this? He took out the bag that contained the sprugs, the gold coins that had been sort of awarded by the Emperor of Blefuscu, but which for Gulliver become worthless because they're not going to buy anything for him. So he thought that I was mad, and then he showed him the gold, and this friend was properly impressed because he also had the Lilliputian emperor's portrait along with that, and says, you know, you can see this, see how minute it is, etc., etc. So he gives him a bag and he says, now do you believe me? And then Swift comes in with his omniscient narrator's voice, and he says, I will not trouble the reader with a particular account of this voyage, which was very prosperous for the most part. We arrived in the Downs on the 13th of April 1702, and he says there was only one misfortune, one piece of bad luck, and that is that one of the sheep that he had brought from such a long distance was consumed by a rat in the ship. Remember how tiny the sheep are. They are what? A couple of inches high, a couple of inches in size. That would be the maximum. And a rat eats one of the sheep. Yuck. The rest of the cattle he brings ashore and he sets them a-grazing, and then he makes a kind of show out of it, and he shows them to people, and people pay him money just as you would in a circus. So this is kind of like a private, a personal circus. So he manages to bring these animals to England from Lilliput and Blefuscu. He didn't spend a long time in England, but he says, I made a profit by showing these cattle to people around me. I put a ticket on it, and there were people who wanted to come and see and observe those cattle, and that's how Gulliver comes back home and sort of puts on a show where he tells people that this is what I did and this is the evidence of where I went. But see, the thing is, once he goes out on a voyage, he gets that desire to keep moving in his blood. And so he spends 2 months with his family in his home, and at the end of 2 months he says, okay, I'm going on a ship again. He has money now because he's been presenting this show, and he has the tiny bit of money given to him by the emperors of Lilliput and Blefuscu. So he buys a house for his wife and children, he gives them money, and then he sails away again. Before he does that, he makes sure that his money is very wisely invested, and he also realizes that a lot of time has gone by, and that his children have grown up. As he says, my son Johnny was at grammar school. He was already in school, and his sister Betty, now these are all imaginary characters. He says that Betty had started doing needlework. You know, it was very fashionable in those days for court ladies and for other ladies to do something like needlework. I took leave of my wife and boy and girl with tears on both sides, and went on board the Adventure, a merchant ship of 300 tons, bound for Surat. So this is the ship that was supposed to travel towards India. Surat, those of you who have read history will have heard the name of Surat, and the fact that it is a port city in India. So this second voyage that Lemuel Gulliver undertakes as the ship's doctor is on a ship that is heading towards India. But, and here is where Gulliver ends his first voyage, he says that story I cannot tell you in this voyage. That story is, as he says, the second part of my travel. So I'm going to tell you this story in another book. Now that is what we have for the first voyage of Gulliver. Before I take leave of you today, I want to quickly go over the points that have been discussed in the lecture that I delivered today. We started with the idea of chapter 8 being the last chapter in the voyage to Lilliput, and how Gulliver, traveling from England, is shipwrecked. The boat in which he tries to escape is overturned because of the intensity of the storm winds. Gulliver swims to shore, finds himself in Lilliput, and finds that in this land of tiny people you have an emperor who has a very big ego. He not only has a huge ego, but he also is cruel, cunning, deceitful, dishonest. And Gulliver finds this out through experience. He experiences at first hand the welcome of the king of Lilliput. He spends time there, but because of his size, the Lilliputians in general and the emperor of Lilliput in particular is scared of his size. The Lilliputians are very small in stature, but they are big on cunning and deceit and treachery. So they make up this story that the navy of the island across from them, that is the island of Blefuscu, is preparing to invade Lilliput. And they call on Gulliver to help them. So what Gulliver does is he sees all the ships anchored there. He ties cables to those ships and he just drags the ships across the channel, brings them to Lilliput. Now when he brings those ships to Lilliput, the emperor is very happy, the emperor is excited, but his desire, his ambition for domination is not satisfied. So he says, you brought those 50 ships, bring all the ships to Lilliput, so that Blefuscu becomes a kind of province and I can rule Blefuscu. Now, Gulliver does not agree with the way the king's mind works. So he said, I am not going to subjugate a free, brave and strong people. I brought you the 50 ships, they cannot invade you now. Be content with what you have, be satisfied with what you have. But the emperor of Blefuscu is not satisfied, so he conspires against him, and he sends he sends out a sort of message to Gulliver that he's a traitor. So Gulliver escapes by going to Blefuscu. He tells the emperor of Lilliput that he's going to Blefuscu for a few days and that he will return. But once he arrives in Blefuscu, he plans to stay there. But his plans are frustrated because he finds out that the Emperor of Blefuscu is the same as the Emperor of Lilliput. There's no difference between them. They are the same kind. They have the same kind of ambition. And so when he sees something that looks like a boat, he drags that to shore, and he requests the Emperor of Blefuscu to let him go. He requests him because he realizes that he's not safe anymore. Remember, the Emperor of Lilliput had said that he is either to be killed, and if he's not killed, then he is to be blinded, so that he learns the lesson that traitors are not welcomed in Lilliput. So it's not that the Emperor of Lilliput is satisfied that Gulliver has gone to Blefuscu. He sends an envoy there also. He sends an ambassador. The ambassador comes to the court of the Emperor of Blefuscu and says, you know, Gulliver has escaped from us, and because he's a traitor, we want you to send him back bound hand and foot, so that he can be blinded and thus punished for treason. Now the Emperor of Blefuscu plays a very sort of diplomatic game. He tells the envoy to take back the message, that he has a lot of respect for the Emperor of Lilliput, but he cannot tie him up because it is physically impossible. Gulliver is very strong. And in any case, he says that he is going away. He's found a vessel, he's going. So let him go. We will not bother with him. We will not be concerned with him once he goes. And on the other hand, he tells Gulliver that if you want to stay here, you're welcome. So he is playing a double game, satisfying the Emperor of Lilliput and making Gulliver into a friend. But Gulliver realizes that kings are not to be trusted, and this is where Swift comes in. This is Swift's judgment, Swift's decision, Swift's opinion that kings and princes are not to be trusted. One is as bad as the other. The Emperor of Blefuscu is no better than the Emperor of Lilliput. In fact, the Emperor of Blefuscu is even more cunning. He's even more vicious, because he plays a diplomatic game. He gives one answer to the Emperor of Lilliput. He gives another and a completely different answer to Gulliver. To Gulliver he says, if you want, you can stay here. To the Emperor of Lilliput he says, you know, I can't tie him up. He's so huge. How can we do it? And then he says, also, he's going, so let's get rid of him. I want to get rid of him also. So he plays this double game. And meanwhile, Gulliver asks the Emperor of Blefuscu to help him out, to give him men, to give him materials. And so the Blefuscudian Emperor provides him with workmen who make the sails, and those who make the cables. Once the cables have been made, Gulliver takes up those cables, twists many of them around because he wants to make a very strong rope. And then he asks the Emperor for some foodstuff. The Emperor provides food for him. He provides drink for him, and then he says goodbye to him. And you see, it's a very fond farewell that Gulliver takes. He says that I lay down on my face. Now, exactly the same exercise he has done previously with the Emperor of Lilliput. The Emperor of Lilliput, the Empress of Lilliput, the princes of the family, all of them Gulliver greets in the same way. And this way, this manner is no different from the manner that he uses with the Blefuscardian emperor and his court. But what Gulliver feels important is that he manages to escape from them. And he escapes from them, he finds a vessel, he goes home to England, but he finds out that now that spirit of moving has entered his blood. He cannot stay at home, so he gives money to his wife, his family, and 2 months after he has reached England, he sets sail on another ship called Adventure, and this time he says that this ship is headed towards India, but he doesn't tell us details. He says that that is to be explained in another book. It's actually another voyage altogether. I hope that you have enjoyed Gulliver's travelogue, and I would like you, when you have time, to access the rest of the book. It's available in the markets, it is available online, and you can download a soft copy and read the whole of the book. My aim is only to introduce you to the writings of Jonathan Swift so that you develop a taste for it, and you can continue your studies. So when we next meet, we are going to start with the introduction to the short story, but that is another lecture. So Allah Hafiz, thank you for being very patient.